Hello everybody, Bradley here, and welcome into another Civilization YouTube video where today we are talking about, just look at these theater squares, man. We're talking all about them. First, before we get started though, we have a Discord server. You should go and join that Discord server. That link is in the description. Here we talk about general stuff. We talk about civilization. If you have a quick question, throw it in here. Look at all this stuff people are talking about. It's a bopping server. There's I want to say just over 300 people in here. We have a good time. You can come and talk about your favorite sports teams and all that. So if this sounds like fun, come and join the Discord. We also have a Twitch stream that you might want to check out. We just recently hit Twitch Partner, which is amazing. Thank you all so much. Feel free to go and follow this live stream. That link is in the description, twitch.tv/VanBradley. If you want to come and check us out, we're playing Civ all the time. We're playing Football Manager. Today we just did a community night with all you guys, and we did some Jackbox Party Pack stuff. So if you guys want to check that out, that link is in the description. We stream a few times a week. We also post all our VODs to our YouTube live channel. That link is also in the description below. And that way, if you want to watch the stream but don't want to go over to Twitch, you can watch them on YouTube and participate as well. All right, so theater squares. Theater squares are interesting because they're simultaneously very similar. I just wish when you hovered your mouse over, that thing wouldn't appear. It looks so ugly to have a thing on the screen. Theater squares are simultaneously very similar to some of the other districts we know and love in Civilization 6. If we take a look at the tech tree, we're getting campuses, encampments, commercial hubs roughly around the same time. We are getting, theater squares, government plaza, all that kind of stuff, entertainment complexes. It's all coming around the same time in the game. So in that sense, it's very similar. Where it differs a little bit, though, is in how to maximize your theater squares. Theater squares have some really kind of weird requirements to pump up those culture numbers and to get those adjacency bonuses higher. So if we take a look at some of them, 2 for an adjacent wonder. It takes time and effort to build wonders. You still get the +1 from every 2 districts, so that's nice if you're building lots of districts. Government plaza, obvious, that's for all districts, not just the theater square. But mostly the main way you're going to get some adjacency early on is by building wonders and building entertainment complexes. And then again, I'm just going to dunk on ley lines. Hermetic order is just, it's not the best. But mostly you're going to be getting your early adjacency from wonders, right? If you want big numbers, wonders and entertainment complexes will give you +2 each. And then you might pick up 1 or 2 here or there early on from another 2 districts or a government plaza. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that it takes a little bit of effort to get all this. This isn't just like campuses that we talked about, where you can just like, ooh, +5 campus and put it down. That's not going to happen with theater squares. You need to be a little more kind of clinical with where you put them and how you plan them to get the most out of them. The good news, though, is that theater squares are a little tricky to make work. They're complicated to set up and to really get the most out of them. The good news is that there is a lot of other ways in this game to get culture. We can't go over all of them today, but I'm going to share with you my strategy for theater squares and how I think about them. My strategy basically boils down to find other ways to get culture early on, and then really set up the infrastructure first and build the theater square later. In this game, we have quite a few theater squares. We have 2 good ones up here. We have a couple kind of put throughout. What all these theater squares have in common is that I built them pretty late. They weren't my first district down. I started with getting the wonders, getting the entertainment complexes, doing some of the other stuff that we needed to do, and then putting the theater square down after. Now, like I mentioned, there are 1,000,001 ways to get culture in Civilization 6. You don't need theater squares to have a high culture number. They do make it easier, however, but let's assume I'm going to use the VB strategy of building my theater squares a little later. And I'm not talking like turn 226. Like, we're not building them that late. We're just building them a little later than we get them, right? Campuses, you get them, you put down your +5 campus, that's right here, and you're good to go. Commercial hubs are sometimes similar. Sometimes you'll just plop one down right away for an extra trade route. But theater squares, like, we're going to get them a drama and poetry. Let's pretend we're going to build them somewhere around our second government, kind of as we're approaching humanism here, so they're ready to go for art museums. How are we going to get our culture before that point? Well, like I mentioned, lots of ways to do this. I'm gonna give you guys this tip here if you don't already use it. If you look at your governors, Pingala, who just conveniently got neutralized, thanks Pingala. Pingala will give you early on, if you go down to Connoisseur, +1 culture per turn for each citizen in the city Pingala is in. So if you put Pingala early on in your capital city, which is right here for us, the greatest civilization, and then you get Pingala to Connoisseur, the second promotion that we talked about right here, what that does is it'll give you like 5, 6, 7, 8 around there culture per turn, which will really give you a nice boost early on to get you up to your government, to get you up to these theater squares, to get you a little bit past that without actually needing to put down good theater squares. So that's kind of how I get my culture before the theater square comes into play. Once the theater square comes into play, though, now you have to start planning and getting the most out of them. For campuses, I said a +3 campus was typically a good campus, and that's like +3 if you're just roaming around and you can just see one. Theater squares, obviously, there's a little bit of setup. I try and get each theater square I put down to around +4 if I can. I would rather have a smaller amount of theater squares that have really good adjacency than a larger amount of theater squares in most of my games, just to be more efficient with the production. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is what wonders are you planning on building, because the wonders you plan on building, especially the early ones, are very, very helpful in helping figure out where your theater squares can go. For instance, in the greatest civilization, we built the Oracle right here. So if we start with the Oracle, not with the theater square, we start with the Oracle, we are building the Oracle right here. Well, we've just opened up a good spot for a theater square. Now that we've opened up a good spot for a theater square, well, maybe we can put down the Hagia Sophia later on in the game.
Hagia Sophia.
Right, but early on, when you're planning this theater square specifically, you build the Oracle first, then you go, oh, I can put a good theater square next to that and work around that, because then we got the Oracle. Okay, we can get a decent theater square here, and then how are we going to make that +4? Well, we get another wonder here, we get another couple of districts here, and we are good to go, and that is now probably +5? That is now a +5 theater square. Look at that. Now, obviously, in some games, in most games, it'll be worth putting a couple of theater squares down. That might not be +4. That's just where you're trying to get to, right? But like I mentioned, I try and get the infrastructure down first. I didn't build the theater square, then the Oracle. I built the Oracle, and once I had that, I was like, okay, now I can build a good theater square here. Now that we've talked about planning around your wonders, obviously, like, there are some games where you might put your wonder in a spot based on where the theater square can go. Something like the Oracle can go on a lot of different hill tiles, so you might place it in a spot that's best for the theater squares. Typically, though, I find myself placing the wonders wherever they need to go, because some of them are pretty specific, and maneuvering the theater squares around that. But once you're done planning around your wonders, right, the next thing you want to plan around is your entertainment complexes. So your entertainment complexes, still have to do a video on those. They're typically going in the middle of a bunch of cities. I'm going to talk about this exception right here in a little bit, but even then, this one hits quite a few cities. Actually, you know what? This one's fine. It's not even really an exception. Typically, your entertainment complexes work like industrial zones. You're going to want them where the stadiums that you build in them hit multiple cities with their bonus, which is 6 tiles. So right here, what we wanted to do is we wanted to find a way to get good districts in these cities, because there's not a lot of mountains for campuses or holy sites. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of space here to build good districts, or not a lot that are very obvious. So what are we going to do? Well, first, we knew we wanted to put an entertainment complex here for a couple of reasons. It would allow us to get the Colosseum, but also it hits 1, 2, 3 other cities with its stadium boost, which is perfectly acceptable. So this entertainment complex is giving out some amenities. That's perfect. Well, now that we have this entertainment complex and the Colosseum being built, now we can really start planning some theater squares. Where better to put a theater square than right in between an entertainment complex and a Colosseum? That'll give it an automatic +4. Right now that you have this entertainment complex here, well, you can build the theater square here. How are these theater squares going to get a little bit better? Well, if I build the government plaza right here, that makes the theater square better, which is awesome. Side bonus is getting 2 better commercial hubs. So you can see kind of how this process played out for us in this game. We build the entertainment complex for amenities, and because we want to build the Colosseum. But now there's not a lot of other good districts around, right? So what are we going to build? Well, we have the entertainment complex, we have the Colosseum, we can build the government plaza. Now we've unlocked the ability to build these 2 good theater squares that I want to say are both +6. Yeah, they're both +6, I remember. Yeah. So what's important to take away from this kind of section of the map is that we took an area that did not have a lot of obvious stuff going for it. There's nothing, you just look at the land, there's nothing obvious here. It's like, oh, I'm going to put down these districts. right? But through the process of just kind of planning out some cities, we manufactured a way to get really good theater squares without forcing it, right? If you force it too much, you might spend too much time trying to make one theater square really good that it's not even worth it. But without even really forcing it, just doing like a couple logical things in this little area, we managed to make 2 really good theater squares out of it. And it's just good to take away that good theater squares require effort, but that effort can be used in so many ways. The entertainment complex can be used for other things like hitting these cities with the boost, right? The government plaza can be used to hit 2 commercial hubs as well. So while you're planning your theater squares, you can also plan so much else in your empire. It's awesome. It's amazing. This was very fun to do. In terms of great people, the theater squares are responsible for so many different great people depending on which buildings you get. You got great writers, great artists, great musicians, and they're going to be coming pretty thick and pretty fast throughout the game. A lot of civs are going to build theater squares. A lot of civs like culture, right? So you have like the Frances, you have Russia. I'm not going to keep going, but you have loads of civs who you know are going to be going for those great people. So in a game of Civ where you're not going for a culture victory, I tend not to worry about these too much, right? If I build a couple of really good theater squares, I'm going to get a couple of these great people, but I'm not worried about it too much. So what I do is I just focus on getting my good theater squares, and I let the great writers, the great artists, and the great musicians just come as they may. My focus is on getting really good theater squares, and if I have to build them a little bit later and forego a couple of great writers to do that, that's probably okay, because once we build the good theater squares, we're going to get a couple of these anyways. In a game where you are going for a culture victory, though, you want to be hammering out these points right away. There's a couple of reasons for this. Obviously, getting these great people, the writers, the artists, the musicians, and being able to just chuck some stuff into here to get that extra culture, that extra tourism, sometimes that extra faith. That's incredible, and that's going to help you towards your victory. The other reason to do it is that every time you take a great writer, you can see we have some starving artists here. Every time you take a great writer and you just don't use it, right? Like Jane Austen is just hanging out here. Every time you take a great writer and don't use it, that means the AI can't get it. You have it, it's here, right? Russia's not going to steal this from you and use it. So every great person in a culture game, right? Every great person, even if you're not using it, you're keeping it from the AI, which can be really helpful. How that relates to theater squares specifically, though, is if you are playing a culture game and you need these early great person points, and you need to put down an early theater square to get them, right? Our early theater squares are typically pretty bad, so I recommend the Oracle strategy. If you're in a culture game, you've got to put down one early theater square so you can start getting some of these points on the board. I recommend getting the Oracle. It has some really good synergy with great person points. We already talked about building Pingala here, and then you get this nice triple synergy. You have the theater square that's going to get a +2 from the Oracle, which is a good start. We're going to work on making that +4 eventually, but that's a good start, +2. The Oracle and Pingala are going to give you the great person points you need here to get a little bit ahead of the AI, especially if someone like Russia's in your game. And then Pingala in the city is going to give you the culture you need to not build this theater square right away, so you can get up to your government without it. So that nice little triple synergy is what I recommend if you really need to build 30 squares, theater squares really early on, so you can snag these great people right away. In your typical game of Civ with 10 to 12 cities, that's kind of the number I like to use, I would say I usually build 4 theater squares, right? I usually build 2 pretty central, 1 or 2 pretty central entertainment complexes, and you can usually fit a couple of theater squares around those, bringing my total to 4, pop in a couple wonders as well. Obviously, that changes based on the game, right? If I have a lot of good wonders positioned around, like, you know, right down here, we have an entertainment complex and a wonder in the Ruhr Valley, I'm almost always going to put this theater square here regardless of count. You can never have enough good theater squares. So if just kind of accidentally you have a bunch of wonders lying around, like here's another good spot, right? If I hadn't built these 2 theater squares, just kind of accidentally we've created a spot right here for a +4 theater square, I would go ahead and grab that even if you already have 6 theater squares or whatever. There's no amount of +4 theater squares that I wouldn't take, but I usually plan around having, I'd say, 4 in most games. And then obviously in a culture game, you want as many theater squares as possible. Some of them you'll build a little bit later. This one I believe we took over, but this theater square is terrible. So what does a terrible theater square do for you in a game? Well, you need the theater square to get these spaces. So if you are going for a culture victory, and the theater square is what you're using to get there, which most times it will be, right? Even if they're bad theater squares, even if they're not giving adjacency bonuses, like this is not a +4 theater square, right? You are going to need to build them, because building even bad theater squares in a culture game will give you these extra spaces in the art galleries and everything to put your great works of art and to use your great people, but also it'll give you more great person points to get these great people in the first place. So if you are in a culture game and you know, hey, I'm gonna have to build a few bad theater squares to get the amount of points that I need, to be able to get the amount of space that I need in our museums, I would recommend making sure that you build your good theater squares first, so they're lower production, and then they start counting down. Remember, everything is additive, right? So you want to start counting down these +4 theater squares as soon as possible, and then focus on your bad ones second. It sounds really obvious, but sometimes you'll have a queue of things going on in the city that's building the good theater square, and you'll have nothing going on in Jinju, and it'll be tempting to just chuck down a bad theater square. Know that in a culture game, you're going to need to build some bad theater squares. This wasn't a culture game. This was just one we took over from the AI, but that's totally fine. But try your best to get your good theater squares first, so you're getting the culture right away, and the good theater squares are the ones that's causing lower production, or costs lower production, sorry. Theater squares are one of those districts too where we actually need to talk about the buildings. I saw in the industrial zone video some people commented that they wanted me to talk about the buildings a little more. I thought covering the factory was really the only one we needed to talk about, but I'll be more conscious of that in the future. But with theater squares, there's lots we need to talk about. So first off, let's talk about the amphitheater. The amphitheater is your base building in the theater square. Once you put your theater square down, this is what you will be building next every single time. 2 culture, citizen slot, great writer points, great work of writing slots. So the amphitheater is important to get those great work of writing slots. In a game where you are going for this like Pingala strat and you're gunning for great writer points right away, I would obviously build this right away to get those great writer points and to get those slots. Otherwise, if you're not gunning for it straight away, you can build the theater square, get your +2 or +4 or whatever, start that generating, and then you can leave the amphitheater for a little bit, maybe grab a builder, grab another settler. Don't feel rushed, right? There are other things in this game that you will need to build once you put this theater square down. So if you're going for that culture victory and you want like some really early great writers, obviously I would prioritize that. If you are not, don't feel bad if you're leaving your amphitheater for a couple of turns after you build your theater square, just to build other things that you might need. More districts, builders, settlers, it's totally fine. You don't need to rush down to this right away unless you're really trying to compete for these early great writers. Once the amphitheater's done though, we have a really interesting choice. We have to choose between the art museum and the archaeological museum. So the art museum and the archaeological museum come in at the same time, and they are, where are they at? Come on, come on, come on. Where are we? Where are they? Here they are. Humanism. We found them. Art Museum and Archeological Museum come in at the same time in the Renaissance era at Humanism, and you can only build one or the other. So you're going to have to make a choice. In each theater square, you can only build one or the other. The reasons to build the art museum are pretty obviously just like within the name art museum here. We need space to hold great works of art. So you need to build enough art museums to hoard a bunch of great works of art. These can be great works of art that you are getting yourself with great artists, or they can be great works that you are buying from the AI. You can go through, one second. Where is an AI? I'm at war with everyone, so this is tough. Well, I can't show you in this video, but you can buy great works from the AI. So you want to be a little bit careful because you're going to need these art museums. Sorry, I'm clicking all over the place. You're going to need these art museums here just to have space to either build your own great works of art or to steal them or to buy them from the AI. The art museum focuses on art. You get +3 great work of art slots, which is awesome. You also get 2 great artist points per turn. So building art museums fills both needs. It gives you the space and gives you the points you need for the great artists. So art museums focusing on art, pretty obvious. If we make the other choice, though, we can go for the Archeological Museum. It holds artifacts, may not be built in a theater square district that already has an art museum. So like I said, you have to choose. Now, the art museum gives us points towards things that other civs can get, right? Other civs can take these great artists if we don't get them, right? The space is always the same. We can build the art museum whenever we want to take up or to get the space for great works of art. But if we don't build it quickly enough, all the great artists are going to be gone by the time we get the points rolling. A little bit different with the Archeological Museum because there are so many spaces on the map. Let's see if I can search them here. Archeological, what do they call them? Archeological. Anyways, shipwrecks is one of them. We have shipwrecks and we have what do they call here? Here's one. Antiquity sites. All right, so just on the map right now, we have 10 shipwrecks. So we have loads of shipwrecks we can get. Right, it's pretty much limitless. We also have antiquity sites here. How many of them are left? And we've been using Archeologist together. We have so many. The point I'm trying to make is on this map, there are 46 options for us to use an archaeologist from an archaeological museum to pick something up on the map. So it's way less competitive than the great artists are. So the Archeological Museum will give us some great artist points as well, which is awesome. But remember, if you build enough archaeological museums and you're getting all these great artist points, if you haven't built enough art museums, you're not going to have enough space. So you want to have a good balance of both. Right, you're going to get the great artist points. You're going to get the great writer points. That's awesome. Still getting the 2 culture. You're going to get 3 artifact slots. And this is the next little thing, is you're going to unlock the ability to buy an archaeologist in the city with the Archeological Museum. The archaeologist looks like this. He is going to go around to shipwrecks and to antiquity sites, and he is going to grab some relics for you. Do we have any of these relics in here? Where are they? Sure we do. Here we go, like a classical artifact, a bracelet. This was something that was picked up by an archaeologist. So these archaeologists are going to go around. One of the reasons I wanted to point this out is because the archaeologist is something you have to build or buy. It's not acquired via points, right? And these are 1,600 gold. So if you're having to choose where to build an art museum and where to build an archaeological museum, you might want to pick the city with a high production to build the archaeological museum, so that when you grab your archaeologist, you can build it quickly. If you build it in a city with a low production, your archaeologist is going to be very, very expensive to get and take like 30 turns to build, where it could take 5 if you pick the right city for the archaeological museum. Either way, you end up pretty even on the total yields. You get 3 great art slots for the art museum. You get 3 artifact slots for the archaeological museum. So you end up pretty even. It's just good to know that the great artist you're going to get passively, whereas the archaeologist you're actually going to have to build, and that takes production and time. So you want to make sure you're doing it in a city that has production. And you can only build them in the city with the archaeological museum. So I can't build an archaeological museum in Gangju and then build the archaeologist in Trakiu. That's not how it works. I find the 2-to-1 ratio, 2 art museums to 1 archaeological museum, to generally be a nice way to get a little bit of balance, to have a little bit of fun in the game. You know, it sounds really dumb, but like having a little bit of diversity in each game is really nice. I don't just like collecting great art over and over and over and over and over again. A little bit of variety is nice with the archaeological museums. They give you a little bit more tourism when they're not themed, which is super nice. So I would recommend, and it's just a general guideline, right? Like if you really like building a lot of art museums, go for it, right? If you really like building a lot of archaeological museums, go for it. I think 2-to-1 is a good mix of balance, a good mix of fun, a good mix of having enough great works of art. I typically try to use my 3rd archaeological museum, right? So you get the 2, what the hell happened in the background? Archeological museum, right? So you get the 2 art museums, and then you have that 3rd district here, which is the archaeological museum, and it's collecting great artist points. So that's nice to have a few more great artists than we have space for them. That takes them away from the AI and gives us a little bit to work with. If we're later in the game and we have a bunch of artists like this lying around, we know, hey, we should build some more theater squares. So I just like the mix. It's not really based on anything. It's just based on just me playing and seeing what I like. So I would play around with it. I don't think there's any like super amazing reason to do a 2-to-1 ratio. It's just what I prefer. It's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I find works in a lot of games. But I wouldn't be surprised if you found a lot of feedback from other Deity Civ streamers that was like, hey, I only build art museums. I only build archaeological museums. I do a 4-to-1 ratio, whatever it is. I recommend 2-to-1, but play around with it, have some fun, and see what you like. There are also some great people that interact with things in certain ways. I think there are some great people that interact with artifacts in a cool way. Maybe a great scientist is the one I'm thinking of. So just be aware that there are other interactions in the game that might be nice to have a little bit of balance between art museums and archaeological museums. All right, I am half an hour into recording. I think that was a lovely chat about theater squares just kind of generally. Obviously, theater squares are so connected. It's so hard to talk about them specifically without talking about the other ways to get culture, the way culture is utilized in the game. I'm really trying to talk about just the district this time, and we can talk about culture as a whole in another video. But in terms of the district, typically go for about four really good theater squares in a game, like just an average game of Civ, 10 to 12 cities. I obviously run up the tally of theater squares in a game where I'm going for a culture victory, and I need as many slots and great person points as possible. possible, and I focus on building the good theater squares first and the bad theater squares last. Also, personally, I like to focus on building the infrastructure first and then the theater squares later. That way when I place them down, they're already +2, +3, +4, instead of kind of waiting for that to come online, because Pingala can give me enough culture to wait for that to come online anyway. So I like to use Pingala early on for my culture and build my theater squares just a little bit later than normal. Build a campus first, build some commercial hubs first maybe, and then we'll get to the theater squares once the wonders and the entertainment complexes are in place. Also dig the 2-to-1 ratio on the Art Museum to Archeological Museum, and I think we covered that nicely. So I think that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. Anvars appreciates you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Feel free to let me know what you liked in the comments, what you didn't like in the comments, all of that fun stuff. Join the Discord, join the Twitch, become a channel member, all of that. You guys, you know what? You guys are just amazing. You guys are just amazing. You know what to do in the description. You know the stuff's down there. You know you can click it and have a good time with that. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.